We will talk about the use cases. That's going to be the focus, and I think we will focus on a lot of frameworks and applications of social media per se from an analytics point of view, right? That's what we'll keep our focus on. So when I talk about use cases, we'll talk about how, at least in my experience, I've used social media from an analytics point of view, and how does that impact business. I think, okay, let's just dive straight into it, right? All right, so before I talk about social media, right, can you guys explain what is a millennial? Who is a millennial, or what, or who is a millennial? See, a millennial essentially has a buying power of, I mean, this is according to the last year's survey, 2016 survey. They have a buying power of 1.3 trillion US dollars, which is basically, think about Saudi Arabia, one of the most oil-rich companies in the world, countries in the world, and multiply the GDP of that by at least 1,000 times. That's the buying power we're thinking about, and which is why millennial as a focus for us. So I'm going to talk about the overall topic from a marketing point of view, because I've been a marketer through my life, right? So from a marketing point of view, that presents immense potential, and we need to figure out where these guys are. And as you rightly said, millennials are obviously pretty much on the social media, right? So hitting them with the right product at the right time at the right place is why we would do social media analytics, right? So that's like a short premise to why we're doing social media analytics. So in terms of agenda, we have essentially 4 topics. We will rattle through marketing, because obviously you guys are not interested why social media, what is social media, but we will talk about how do you apply that in the overall marketing mix for sure. We will talk about how do you measure impact, and then we'll jump straight into case studies, right? So from my point of view, this is the 4 things that I would like you guys to take away from today, right? The relevance in the overall marketing mix, channel, from a social media as a channel point of view. One important thing I want to talk about and focus on is what is the difference between a strategy and a tactic, and we'll talk about examples and not just keep this in the air, right? And how social media can be applied across the overall business value chain. Measurements, of course, we'll talk about frameworks, and we'll talk about metrics that you typically look at when you talk about social media analytics, which probably does involve a lot of text analytics as well. And of course, we look at the case studies, right? These are 4 major takeaways or objectives that you want to end the day with. All right. A little brief about myself. So my name is Sachin Dev. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Sachin. So I currently lead marketing analytics for a US insurance firm called Allstate. So Allstate essentially is one of the biggest property and casualty insurance company in the world. In the US, they only have operations in the US markets. And they've set up a technology captive here in India for the last 3 years, and they're slowly starting to set up the analytics value chain, right? Prior to this, I worked with a company called NetApp, which is into storage solutions. I was heading their global marketing operations function, which basically boils down to making sense of marketing as a function, and does that hit any kind of ROI for the overall organization at all, right? So that's the single function that I essentially was dealing with for a couple of years at NetApp. Prior to NetApp, I was with HP, which has a fairly huge analytics practice here in Bangalore. Worked across different business, enterprise, and consumer for HP, helping optimize business through the use of analytics. And before that was with HSBC, helping them improve their digital marketing operations through analytics, right? So that's been my background in the analytics industry per se. I'm essentially an engineer from Bichpalani, did my MBA from ISB as well. I do a lot of writing and reading, and that's why you would find me on the net. Cool. All right. We'll skip this, but I do want to focus on a couple of things on this one, right? The typical explanation of what social media is this, which is a mouthful and when you read it, but I want you to focus on one thing, which is about discussing information and experiences with other human beings. Now, in today's context, how relevant is that definition? Do you guys have any thoughts about how relevant or how irrelevant that definition is when you say other human beings? Have you guys taken a look at today's the supplement for Economic Times? It's right there outside. Okay, so you obviously heard of. Okay, let's say you want to buy a new insurance policy, and you go to which website do you go to when you want to compare insurance policies? Policybazaar.com, right? So when you log in, when you go to policybazaar.com, what happens first? Do you get a pop-up? Fair enough. Yeah, that's for them to essentially track down your profile per se. But even before you do that, right, you have a pop-up that pops up and says hello, either your name or it's typically like a generic hello if you've never interacted with Policy Bazaar before, right? Now that obviously is a chatbot. You guys are familiar with the chatbot concept, right? Essentially it's a machine. Now in this context of conversations with other human beings, it's a little dated right now, because today the content that you generate is not just between human beings as well. While 95% of the content is actually generated by human beings, but I do want to talk about, do want to take your focus to the fact that there are machines out there which are actually mimicking human beings as well, right? If you get a chance, do read a book called Rise of the Robos. Okay, it talks about the application of AI and machine learning, specifically robotics point of view, and it talks about the application of this across different industries. You'd be surprised to know about so you would think that the last frontier that a machine can actually take over is creativity, right? So say writing. I'm a writer. I'm passionate about writing, but there is a sports journal which essentially uses AI to actually compile sports reports about what happened in the previous day's matches, right, in the US, and that's becoming popular, the norm of the day. So yeah, this definition is probably dated right now because content is not just generated between human interactions per se. All right. Having said that, we'll just move on because the rest of it is something that you would know. I'm gonna. Do you guys want to sit through the slide, because this essentially talks about where things originated. It's an interesting slide because you can get to know your favorite social media networks and how that originated and where they're going, right? So early 2003 was when the first few social networks started, and that was the launch phase. And you look at Facebook, it's right there in 2004. So Orkut, we didn't purposely put Orkut here because Orkut probably died around somewhere here, right? 2008, 9. Now that's an interesting observation. Now I want you guys to think about, why did Orkut die? Alright, so yeah, so I think we're still talking about why Facebook's features were probably a little more user friendly, a little more innovative, a little more, catching up with the trend point of view, and hence people moved on. Now the underlying, the economics theory for that is something called network effect. Have you guys heard of network effect? So network effect is the fact that the more people join the network, the more you stand to gain out of it, right? So when I'm deciding to join a social network for that matter, I see there are two options, Orkut and Facebook. And I see that most of my friends are active on Facebook now. They moved on from Orkut. And they're actually liking Facebook a lot more than Orkut. And hence I would join Facebook because my group of friends are exclusive on Facebook. So when Facebook was kicking off, there was a whole exclusivity factor to it. So the network effect is that now anybody who's coming in new will obviously gain a lot more by joining Facebook as opposed to Orkut. And then people slowly start dropping off, and then nobody else really joined new Orkut, right? So that's the whole network effect point of view, which essentially came into fruition, and hence Orkut started becoming just a spam heaven, right? And see, a lot of people from Brazil and India started spamming on Orkut. So that's what happened. Yeah, so that was around, say, 2008 and 9. But post 2006 and 7 was when a lot of these investments in the social media space started really taking off, right? So all these biggies like Sequoia and Tiger, who backed up Facebook, and the other smaller, social networks like LinkedIn and all that, they all started reaping benefits of having invested in these networks. Now, if you guys realize, in the last 3 years was when Facebook and Twitter actually actively changed their user policies, right? Can you guys think about what big changes have happened from a Facebook point of view? Yeah, I mean, they've tried to beef up security, but essentially what they do is, from a content sharing point of view, it's become all the more difficult for you to start sharing content unless and until you start paying up. So the Facebook wants you to open up your purse strings right now. So initially, let's say you own a page on Facebook and you have, let's say, 1 million subscribers, or what is it called? Followers, yes, followers to the page, right? So, and you would put let's say you are hosting a new event on that page, and you would assume that your 100,000 followers would actually get that ping, or the fact that it'll pop up on their feed, but it doesn't happen like that. So now it's just less than 1% of your follower community that actually gets to know that there is something happening on your page. And for the rest of it, Facebook wants you to create a paid campaign. So that's the same thing. That's the same model that Twitter is going after as well. Twitter essentially is so people are very active on Twitter, right? You probably have got prompts from Twitter saying, "Why don't you do a paid campaign around these messaging?" Right? So all of these social media companies have just slowly started trawling through millions and trillions of records that they have at their backend, and they're figuring out these are prospective targets whom I can actually convert to a paid customer for me. Right? That's what's happening in the background. Yeah, so that's what's changed in the last couple of years, from I think post 2010 as well. Right, so we move on. Yes. Okay, so why is social media important? Some of the stats that essentially talks about that. Let's say you want to buy a new phone. You would obviously go to your NDTV gadgets and gsmarena.com and figure out what are the best features of your OnePlus 5 versus Moto Z2, right? But you would trust the opinion of your best friend who's actually bought the Moto Z2 and has bought it home and has actually played around with it, and then probably posted on your social media network saying, okay, I bought a new phone and this is what sucks or this is what is good. So in terms of influencing people, I think you would believe your closest social network as opposed to a stranger or a critique review, right? So that's why social media is so important for a marketing point of view, because as it's rightly said, 3 times more likely to trust peer opinions over advertising for purchase conditions. So which is why I think social media makes a very powerful channel for us as a marketer to go ahead and hit the right people in the right way. What else do I want to take? What do you take away from here? Right. So the follow-ups for you as a marketer is basically this, right? Why do people buy? Now, okay, here I want to talk about how many of you are aware of the typical purchasing funnel, which looks like this. So you must have gone through your marketing 101 classes, well, right? So which talks about the IDA channel. Did you learn the IDA at all? You must have gone through this funnel, right? Which is the classic IDA channel, which is awareness, intent, desire, and action. Like how does somebody flow through this entire channel? Now, in today's context, this funnel actually stands wide, purely because of social media. Today, think of it like this, which is like an input. The funnel is probably being subverted, and essentially it becomes an entire squiggle, for lack of a better word. Let's put names to this, right? So essentially somebody has seen a newspaper. That's the first touch point. And then he goes to Google and then does a search, and then he pops up on one of the Google search results. Then he goes to the website, studies about the product that he wants to look at, and then he logs out. But a few days later he logs back into the internet, and then he sees a display ad which actually talks about, let me know if these terms seem alien. I can talk briefly about these terms and then move on. Okay, right? So there are multiple touch points before somebody actually converts, right? So what does this mean for you as a marketing person and an analytics person? So as an analytics person, this problem typically is known as attribution problem. So just a brief, I know I'm digressing, but I'll come back to the topic as well, right? So attribution essentially is about, let's say you have, and it's also called as the marketing mix model, right? Market mix model, the marketing mix models. So let's say you have $100 million as an advertising budget, and your CEO comes and tells you, how do I best spend my $100 million? And the CMO essentially reaches out to the analytics team and says, okay, build me an attribution model that essentially helps me identify that social media has the highest influence in having driven purchase, right? So the attribution problem classically used to be dealt like this, which is, let's say we had about, so you understand, you guys have got the situation as to what is happening, right? So the same guy has about at least 7 or 8 marketing channels, marketing touch points before he converts. But you need to figure out how much money do I spend on Google to make sure he sees the relevant ads. How do I improve my website through an SEO? or do I spend money on the Google display network? So does this term seem alien to you, retargeting? All of you must have been targets of the retargeting exercise. Think about you went to Flipkart and searched for whatever a new product, which is a Fitbit wearable, right? And then you log out of Flipkart, but you go to some other website and the display ad pops up on your site saying, okay, there is a discount on your Fitbit thingy right there. So what is happening on the background is all of this websites are on the same Google display network, right? And they've all paid Google money to say that, okay, if this is my prospective target, if this guy comes up on your network or any other website, please show him this target ad as well. So that's a whole retargeting. I've obviously simplified the process of retargeting. There is a lot of programmatic math behind how to do retargeting, but for the sake of simplifying things, I'm doing that here. So that's your display ad. So now coming back to the attribution problem. So the simplest way to solve an attribution problem is this. I would attribute all my sale to just the first touch point, giving 0% to the rest of it, saying that only he bought it purely because of whatever. This is obviously something that you can't track, but somebody bought a product purely because of search engine marketing, right? But today we use different. Okay, the simplest way to do this is build out a regression model, which would essentially assign weightages to the different channels from the money point of view that you spend on each channel, and you're essentially trying to figure out sales, right? Cool. So the regression, the whole point of building a regression model is that you would understand the weightage, which is nothing but the influence of each of these channels on driving sales, right? So that's the. I mean, it's very simplified. Obviously, it's not a straightforward regression problem. We would have to build it out in different forms, but for the sake of understanding. So why did we talk about attribution again? The fact that the consumer, the human psychology as to why do people buy. I'm saying it's not as simple as what they teach you in a Philip Kotler textbook, which is to build out your idea and say that somebody's awareness becomes an action as long as you hit them with a brand campaign here and a sale campaign here. That is not the way we do it. Cool. Let's move on. Cool. Jumping on. So what is the difference between a strategy and an objective or a tactic? This is a fairly straightforward explanation. I don't know why they would want to call something which is very simple as this as an answer of metrics, but ultimately it boils down to the fact that these are the four major strategies that any company would follow at any point of time, right? So you're in the existing market and you're trying to sell existing products, then you would essentially focus on trying to penetrate deeper into the same market. As opposed to you are in an existing market, you're trying to come up with a new product, you would focus, your strategy is to basically develop a new line of business or do a product development part. Trying to sell an existing product into a new market, you essentially would focus on developing that overall market for you, right? Size the pie. And this is your most riskiest strategy, which is basically going into a new market with a new product, otherwise known as diversification. Now, I want to essentially talk about an example that is close to my heart, which is something that's happening in my company right now. So as I said, Allstate is a insurance company. So we're in the business of insuring cars and home properties, right? Now, auto as a market has been facing severe headwinds, meaning we've essentially, the overall auto market has been dwindling like crazy in the last 3-4 years. So the premiums are going up and the claims are going up as well, right? So which basically means that we don't essentially have, we are bleeding in that market now. So and where is the threat coming from? So in the last couple of years, so Google and Uber have started testing out driverless cars. So this is not a reality today, but it could probably become like a fairly big threat to us in the future. So when you think about driverless cars, right, who do you actually go ahead and insure? The car itself? Okay, good point. So now the car itself, as a consumer, let's say they decide to start lending the car out to a consumer, right? The consumer is not, he would be interested in trying to insure the car, yes, because he wants to keep the car safe. But that's more from a OEM point of view, which is the manufacturer point of view, right? They would be interested in making sure their cars that they lease out or lent out are in perfect condition, because because I'm not sure how the business model is going to play out when it comes to an end consumer. A driverless car becoming owned by an end consumer, I think the business model itself is still not too clear. But the point is, with this probably becoming a reality, the insurance market for auto is definitely going to be threatened. Now, our CEO, whose name is Tom Wilson, he came out with a vision statement saying by 2021, I want to make, okay, this is wrong, this should be at least 2018, but essentially while our overall objective as a marketing team is to grow our in-force policies, he's going into diversification. While we traditionally were in the auto market, now we want to get into the life market. So we don't sell life insurance. We do sell, but it's a very small portfolio from an overall lines of business. But the idea was, let's get out of auto, not let's get out, but let's focus while the size of the pie is decreasing in auto, let's try and increase that pie in another market, which is life insurance. That is the overall diversification strategy, right? He essentially said that at least 25% of all US households, which are also our consumer, would own an Allstate life insurance policy. So what does that mean for us as a marketer, as a on the ground analytics person? So I'll talk a little about how my team is actually trying to realize that strategy, right? So okay, do you guys understand the concept of a propensity model, or the term propensity? Yeah, penetration is probably like a post factor of what happens after the propensity. Propensity is nothing but the likelihood that you would do anything, right? So as a marketing analytics person, I'm charged this problem. Essentially, I'm translating this overall vision statement into an analytics problem statement, which is to say that I need to figure out that segment of my consumer population who already owns an auto policy, but who has the highest propensity to go ahead and buy life from me, right? So that's the analytics problem statement. So how we've essentially translated this into an analytics problem statement. Now, how do you break up that problem statement, which is to say, identify all those guys who have already an auto policy and who would probably go ahead and buy the life. So that becomes a propensity modeling problem. So in the marketing analytics world, propensity modeling is a fairly big term. Propensity modeling is nothing but you figure out who's your best target customer who has the propensity to buy your product. As simple as that, right? So that's called propensity modeling. But how do you make that a reality? Hopefully this should be interesting, because we are essentially talking about analytics problem in real life, right? So what we first did was, so the US population is about 350 million odd people, right? Now in the US, consumer information is a little more mature and more rampant as opposed to India. India, at a consumer level, the information is very sparse, right? We don't know enough about people because pretty much in the US you can track everybody's digital patterns, right? So what has happened in the US over the last few years is a lot of database marketing companies have sprung up, and they've started selling data to the companies for use. So Experian is a fairly big database marketing company. So Allstate as a company has actually bought data from Experian about close to 230 US million folks, which translates to about 125 US households. So what we have on hand is for 125 million households, I know everything about their demographics. I know everything about their credit history. I know everything about the auto market, whatever, affinity. And this is at a person level. This could be at a person level as well, or it could be aggregated at a zip level. This is a zip level. Let me know if these terms look new to you. You understand what's the demographic of any person, right? So this essentially translates to about 1054 features. So now I'm talking analytics, all right, which should interest you guys. I've gone from marketing to analytics right now. So what does this translate to? To solve any analytics problem. Now I have 1054 features about all these guys, and now I need to figure out what are these features that drive different conversion behaviors. Okay, and the features I'm talking about is demographics. For example, whatever age, region they belong to, sex, ethnicity, and tons of other information, right? The credit information could be the fact that they've taken a mortgage, they probably moved a house in the last 6 months, what is their repayment ratio, blah blah blah. Auto information could be the fact that they own X number of cars, or the fact that they own some specific type of a car in the market, or they're in the market looking to buy a new car, etc., etc., right? These are all relevant information when you're trying to predict whether he will become an auto insurance customer for me. Now our problem though is basically we need to figure out, ring a bell in terms of a condition probability. Does it look like a condition probability, right? So essentially it boils down to a condition probability, which is the base theorem. But how do I approach this problem is, you would first decide a performance window. Let's say in the last 12 months of, let's say, and I already have close to out of my 228 million records in the last 1 year, let's say about 600,000 have life, and they bought the life in this last 12-month time period, and at the start of the 12-month time period they were already holding an auto. So the term cross-sell, obviously you guys understand what a cross-sell is, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to cross-sell life to an existing auto policy consumer. So hence, which is why we put all these filtering conditions. Among the existing 228 million, you would want to marry that to our prior transaction history, which we have, which talks about with Allstate as a company, how many folks have actually bought, how many folks have already bought policy at the start of the auto policy at the start of the 12 years, and in the last 12 months have also bought a life. So that becomes my outcome or target population on whom I want to build my lookalike profiles for, because the rest of the guys actually would have to look similar to this, right? So somebody who's bought an auto before 12 months and bought life in the last 1 year, how does he look like in terms of his demographics, his credit history, his auto market affinity? That is the problem that we're trying to solve. And this obviously becomes a classification problem, because what you're trying to solve here is we're trying to model for the event whether he will buy or not buy, right? So it becomes a 1 to 0 binary outcome classification. We build classification models, and you can obviously start with the logistic. But have you guys finished your classification, various methodologies to how to solve classification problem? Discriminant analysis, that would mostly be for a feature reduction. You can probably use that because you have 1054 features and you want to reduce that features to a usable, sizable number. You can apply discriminant, but logistic makes sense, right? So essentially any tree would make sense. Now I think what we've done is we've gone beyond trees. We've looked at higher form trees in terms of bagging and boosting, which is random forest, which you must have heard. You must have heard GBM as well, gradient boosting methodology, right? Then there is GBM on steroids, which is called XGBoost, and then there is SVM, and the highest form was neural networks, right? We've not applied neural network because I think it's a computationally very intensive problem, so we've not applied neural, but I think we applied pretty much everything else to build our models. So what we're doing today is we're building, see, at this point my modeling team and the US business team do not focus so much on we don't want an intuitive solution. Like a tree will give you a set of rules, right? A logistics would give you the weightage of the coefficients and the direction in which the coefficients can influence your final outcome, right? To say, let's say mortgage pops up as one of the significant factors when you build your logistic, and you have a weightage, a coefficient of whatever, positive coefficient, and you know that the higher the mortgage, the more the chances that he will buy an insurance. That's how you will interpret it, right? Now, but we don't care about that. All we care about is what's your, so there are different model fit parameters, right? And I think that for any classification problem, you will obviously look at, you will build out your confusion matrices. You understand confusion matrix, right? And you would look at the AUC, the area under the curve, right? The ROC curve. So ROC is like the AUC is the very generalized form of how good a model predicts your binary outcome is. And what we do as well from a business point of view, we translate that. So the outcome of this model is basically a probability score, correct? Which is say this is the probability that he will convert or not convert. Now, so you would assign, so everybody, the entire 228. So this is probably built on a smaller, subset, sample subset, not the entire 600 million or 600,000. You can probably take 100,000 and build out a model. You would do your training versus testing to make sure AUC parameters of training versus test is very similar. We're not overfitting and all that, right? Once we do that, I want to translate this in my entire population to see if I build out, essentially apply the model on my entire. I won't build it on my entire 228. I will build it out on among the 228 who's had an auto policy, because that's your cross-sell filter criteria. To say that among 228, let's say 100 million already have auto. Now this is my target population because I want to cross-sell life too. So on my 100 million, I run my model again, and essentially I apply the model, and I'll get probability scores assigned to each of those 100 million records. Everybody gets a probability score, right? And next what we do is we build out a decile plot, which is nothing but we rank order these guys based on their probability scores, and then we say divide them into groups of 10 because that's what decile is. And then you say so typically it will look like this. So random is nothing but it's the existing probability that of the 100 million, how many in the past have had life, and so let's say that's about 3%, right? And but my top decile, second decile, and third decile, all of it is about 3%, which is giving me about 7% conversion, 6%, and let's say whatever 4%. So this three are my best three deciles that I want to target from an operationalizing point of view. So that's how the business makes use of the output of a model. So in terms of operationalizing, this is how things would happen. So we would decide, okay, these are my top three segments. Now the model obviously, so when you build a GBM, right? GBM, that's a gradient boosting methodology, right? So let me stop me if I'm using terms which are not familiar. So GBM would also throw out your parameters which helped build the overall model, which is to say these are my significant feature set. That's about 15 variables that help me build out my final model. So what we also do is, using those 15 variables, we try and qualify these guys. Everybody who falls into my top three segments, I'll try and qualify these guys. To say a guy who falls in my best segment has a mortgage value of whatever, so and so. He has the number of children in his household is 6 on an average, right? So we'll essentially add color to these segments. That would help the marketing team decide what test that you would run to figure out from a scaling point of view, is it worthwhile to go after this guy? Will this guy bind, in the sense, will he buy a life policy or not? So that's the life cycle. So just to complete that argument, right? So we've done this part, which is we've translated this statement to an analytics problem. We essentially ran through the entire life cycle of how that will be used by the marketing team overall, right? But my CMO comes and tells me, Sachin, I want you to figure out whether it's worthwhile investing in social media as a channel, right? I don't have an answer to that, because so we would have to design, because till date, and I'll talk about the ROI factor of social media as well, but till date there is no clear line of sight into the final returns, which returns in terms of bottom line impact, which originated from a social media, a sale that originated from a social media. So first thing I would have to do is I have to set up the underlying data infrastructure so that I can track somebody from coming in from a social media right down from his first visit to down to his sale, right? And that'll take some time. That'll take about 3 months to actually set that and make sure we have a sizable number of sample set by which I can build any models which will mathematically explain the impact of social media activities on a sale. So it's still a work in progress. I mean, the other things you can obviously do is you can run a lot of these smaller marketing tests and campaigns to see if people actually react to different social media campaigns and all that. There is an interesting case study that I'll talk about in the end, which talks about trying to game or trying to predict social engagement. It's never been done before. It's an interesting experiment done by a company in Brazil. I'll talk about that towards the end. I'll just pause and let you guys read through it and let me know what questions you have on this. This is essentially about the application of typically from a overall marketing mix. How is social media analytics applied? What are we measuring, and what is it used for? Right. So just quickly running through it. So brand analytics, the promise that it can deliver on what it promises to. Right. So typically, from a brand analytics point of view, what we do is it's a very high level function where we understand where our brand stands with respect to other brands in a particular category. Let's say you work for Flipkart. I'm talking about Flipkart because in the other class there were folks from Flipkart as well. So let's take the example of Flipkart versus Amazon. So Flipkart is obviously a copy of Amazon, which came into India and essentially customized their operations to the Indian market and is doing fairly well. I think, but their valuations have dropped big time, right? They're going for an IPO, but let's see how that pops out. Now, why am I talking Flipkart as Amazon? So, from a share of voice point of view, let's say Flipkart did the whole big billion sale, ran for 5 days, and then Amazon, right on the heels of that, did a great Indian shopping festival, right? 5 days again. Now, as a market analyst, as a person who's studying the e-com market in India, what does he do? Let's say he works for Gartner, and then typically what he would do is, from a social media point of view, he reaches out and figures out what is the number of conversations happening in the social media space about both these brands, right? So I will talk about how he operationally does it because that's one of the topics later. But ultimately, it boils down to this: in terms of conversation volume, how do these two brands figure? Like the number of posts, the number of conversations which have the keywords of Flipkart versus Amazon, right? So that's nothing but that gives them an overall sense of what is the share of voice. Now, share of voice is actually a very misleading, metric because you don't know whether the share of voice is actually positive or negative. And that's why your entire sentiment analysis comes into play. Now, what do you use sentiment analysis for? Is something that I still haven't figured out. Maybe you guys can throw some light and talk about how you typically use sentiment analysis. We'll get to that in a while, right? But yeah, that's the share of voice. This is about ensuring that the right kind of communication goes out, and then after you run a sales campaign or a brand campaign, you understand the difference between a brand versus a sales campaign? A brand campaign is nothing but it's typically at the top of your funnel. I'm taking you back to IDA. So it's at the top of the funnel to make sure you're aware that a brand exists, and it's just to reinforce our brand identity. But a sale campaign has a very specific messaging to make sure you're actually going down low the funnel and you're converting, right? That's your brand versus sales. Now, any type of campaign that you run, you need to figure out how successful the campaign was, and did that campaign give you an ROI or not, right? So that's your marketing income. And how do you do that? I'll just come to that in a while. Product reviews versus customer service. So a lot of times, from a customer service point of view, social media is a great channel to engage with your end consumer. So imagine on Twitter. So okay, I'll give you this personal example. So we I think one Saturday evening, we went and bought beer, and then we came back and figured out we bought KF Ultra or something, right? And then we figured out there is some dirt particles or worms inside the packaged KF Ultra bottle, right, beer bottle. And we took a photograph of that. We put that on Twitter. We tweeted that to the UB, United Breweries, and the KF handles. They were fairly reactive. They came back to us and asked us to give us details about where you bought this from and all that. But after that, nothing really happened. So then we tried to raise hell, right? We essentially tried to make that post go viral. Now, this happens a lot of times, and brands take a big hit because of this. Now, so we need to ensure that you essentially are containing that containing the damage. So you need to have a very reactive engagement out there to contain and do damage control, right? So that's the whole customer service angle of how important social media is. Product reviews is nothing but, let's say we popped out with a new product, and then there is a lot of conversations about the features of the product itself, and we need to figure out which feature did people like or did not like. Can I feed that back into my R&D cycle or not? So that's your product reviews. Moving on. We spoke about this. I'm just going to skip it. Okay, just one point. What's the biggest innovation in printing industry? 3D printing, right? Before 3D printing came out, I think the innovation that they worked on was something called e-print. which is the ability for you to be able to print wirelessly sitting anywhere. Essentially, your printer has an email address to which you can send stuff to, and the printer pops it out by the time you get back home, right? So when HP launched the ePrint enabled printers, I think it was 2011 or 12, we did a lot of interesting study in the market to figure out what are people talking about that, what are the platforms in which people are talking about ePrint, how big the buzz is, and all that. So that's your whole understanding of the brand analytics based on social media. Skipping through that, this is an example of product reviews and servicing. Same example, same product, which is the ePrint, but we were essentially able to figure out people are looking for a Windows 8 compatible, two-side, auto-side orienting, blah blah blah, other different features, right? So all this were done essentially on the HP ePrint launch, the post launch per se. Okay, quick question. I know you must have read a lot of articles on the net and all that about social media analytics per se, but is there any way which we can try and predict the success of a product during launch using social media? Okay, it's on the verge of launching, but you've built a lot of pre-hype buzz or pre-launch buzz about the product on the social media, just to make sure that, for example, what OnePlus 5 is doing right now, right? So OnePlus 5 is doing a lot of hype about their launch on June 22nd. Will that be a success or not? Can you predict it? But what you talked about in terms of the digital engagement with the different forms of advertising that you would do, does that lead to a product buy or not? That's something that you want to predict. Cool. Yeah, so why I brought this up was, I think one of the most famous case study for social media analytics using Twitter is to predict stock markets and box office revenues, right? I think box office revenues are very it's been done to death because the different research communities have actually worked on box office prediction using Twitter. So I think they looked at the volume of tweets and correlated that to the first week box office prediction, and they built it out as a regression problem. But yeah, we wanted to translate that to one of the HP product launches as well. We failed miserably. We didn't really get any great model at all. When ePrint was launched, I think after ePrint was launched, I think we did an exercise to do in the first week, second week, third week, how is the trend volumes and does that actually translate to a sales volume at all? We didn't really find any great correlation. Yeah. But it's just a food for thought. Alright, measurements. Okay, this, I'm sure you've seen this code before. Do you think this code is relevant? Alright, so I would say this is not relevant now, but yeah, I think the CMO typically gets roasted on any CXO level meeting because the CEO essentially would ask him, where is the money? And unless and until you're able to draw that correlation or line of sight into the final sales based on all your marketing activities, he's not able to do it. So which is why a lot of the CMO activities are very analytics driven right now. Like my entire team is purely surviving because of that theme, because we do marketing analytics. But yeah, talking about the specific social media metrics. So there are two types of metrics, vanity versus actionable. Give me an example of vanity metric. I'm sure you guys know. From a Facebook, let's take one platform, Facebook. What do you think is a vanity? What is a vanity metric, by the way? Are you guys aware of vanity metrics? Vanity is, as the name suggests, right? It's vain. It's a useless metric. It just looks good, but doesn't really add value. It doesn't translate to a sale. So from a Facebook point of view, do you think there are any vanity metrics? That makes sense. Come on, what are the metrics in Facebook that you look at? What are you interested in? Let's say I'm posting something. What do you typically look at? Likes? Yeah, likes and comments. Okay, likes. So does likes mean anything for you? Obviously, it gives you like a boost because it says that okay, so many people like my new photograph. But yeah, I think from a individual consumer point of view, doesn't really help. But let's talk about it from a marketing point of view. Let's say I put up a teaser photograph of the OnePlus 5, right? Or a teaser video OnePlus 5, and I've got about 100 million likes on it. Does that 100 million translate to a sale? No, it doesn't. What percent of that translates? Less than 1%. Right, so that's a vanity metric. As opposed to an actionable metric is your comments versus say reshares or shares rather on this thing, or a retweet on Twitter, right? Those are a little more actionable because it gives you a sense of what is again your potential reach in terms of who's your potential target going to be, right? Who's your brand ambassador going to be? So we'll talk about that in a little more while. Okay, a quick look at the typical measurement framework that I would look for while measuring the social media activities that I do, right? You want to build a free tool, you probably have to go down to getting the raw data from an API, read that and use your Python libraries and start doing your stuff, right? Most of the tools out there are not free, but they do have trial versions. Like, so biggest tools are like your used to be Radian 6, Crimson Hexagon, but they're all licensed tools. There are dictionary based tools which lets you do text analytics. There's something called PolyAnalyst. I think that's something that is free. You can check out PolyAnalyst, POLY analyst, right? PolyAnalyst. I think I'll talk about the tools in the next few slides as well. But yeah, so I mean, these are all straightforward things, right? You essentially want to listen out there and okay, determining influences. Now this is something interesting. Why is an influencer important for us from engagement or from any point of view? All right, so essentially an influence. So what we've done is an influencer essentially is a guy who probably will become a brand ambassador for you if you engage with them the right way, right? And what we did in our previous company was we designed an algo by which you could rank order your different influencers and figure out who's my top 2 influencers and then engage with them in the right manner so they become the brand ambassador. So it becomes very critical from an engagement point of view, which is the next one. The last one, how do you engage with the right people, right? Suggestions, recommendations, blah blah blah. Alright, moving on. I'm going to skip this because you've probably seen this slide in terms of what happens in 1 internet minute in terms of different platforms, Google, Facebook, blah blah blah. Just to give you a sense of the conversation volume. So the 97% of data that we have today has been generated in the last couple of years, 3-4 years max, right? And that's a fun part of it. So which is why while machine learning as a concept has been there since 1950s, it's a very old concept, machine learning, right? Essentially teaching a machine to learn and start mimicking things. But at that point in time, we didn't have enough data. Now we have staggering amounts of data, right? What's the latest storage unit that you guys know of? Like you have your zettabyte, petabytes. We'll skip this because you know what this is. Essentially breaking up the 3 different categories of metrics into specific metrics under each platform, right? You know, these are fairly straightforward things. Another thing when you typically look at when you measure social media engagement or social media activities, you would want to understand who your target profiles are. So your native, for example, if you own a page on Facebook, you can actually log in and then look at your Facebook Insights, which is your native Facebook reporting interface that lets you figure out what's happening on your page, right? And that also lets you pretty much break up your target or audience segment into which demographics and which regions they're coming from. And that's true for pretty much every platform. Every platform has its own native reporting interface which you can make use of to develop simplistic reports, but you want a lot more holistic report. That's when you would tie up with your Radian 6s and Crimson Hexagons and all that, which have streaming API data flow in, and which is basically aggregated into reports that you can pull out on a regular basis. Has anybody tried using the streaming API or REST API for any of these segments? I think that's an exercise you should probably try. So especially when it comes to text analytics, right? So I mean, there are tons and tons of literature out there in terms of how you do it. So there were specific Python libraries that you can use to read it. But I think streaming API gives you the difference is when we tried it like about 4 years back, we had access to a much larger set of data. Twitter now has changed its policy, so it's only less than 1% of your overall data sample that you would get when you do a streaming API. And you would need, I mean, it's okay for you to, it's a directionally right thing to do. You get that less than 1% data, build your models or break your text into actionable formats and all that. But yeah, you should probably try that as well. Streaming API. Read up on streaming API, and I think the other one is called REST API, REST API. Two things. All right, I'm just going to pause, let you guys read through it if you can. about different ways of looking at the social media activity and metrics, but I'll come back to this in just a while. So alright, so usually when we look at reporting from a social media point of view, we would do the reports in this manner to say what changed in the last 1 week, right? So this is all the set of metrics that you would want to measure, let's say, but if you look at the metrics, things have changed over the last 1 week, right? So for example, something called passion, which is at 34%, has dropped to 24%, while your reach has gone up from 56 to 72%. Does that mean anything to you, or is that positive or negative, or is that neutral? So the passion is basically defined as this, which is the likelihood that the same individuals talk about our product repeatedly. So passion is a measure of your brand ambassadors. These are guys who are really passionate about your product, would continuously talk about it, make sure that others react to it. But what you see here is the fact that your passion's dropped from 35 to 25%. So people have actually stopped talking about it. While your reach has gone up, it really hasn't helped. From 56 to 72, the reach really hasn't helped, right? So I mean, these are typical insights that you would pop out and then let your management know, the e-business guys know that things have changed, right? Alright, just a quick look at the native analytics from Twitter. Lets you figure out what is the total number of impressions. You understand the concept of impression? Yes? No? Okay, impression is nothing but the number of views or eyeballs on a particular post or a display ad or anything, right? So this just tells me that okay, 2,500 people viewed all my tweets in the last 28-day period, right? So anybody, are you guys active on Twitter? Do you guys have active Twitter accounts? Okay, so if yes, then I think you should just log into analytics.twitter.com, use your normal Twitter handle login, then you should be able to pull out your native reports, which tells you how you've been doing over the last specific performance window. But this doesn't tell me anything. This tells me that okay, on an average I got about 85 impressions per day. Does that help you? No, it doesn't. So we should probably look at one level deeper to say which is the tweet that has actually helped you gain engagement. And engagement could be it's a very broad definition. I think anybody who's reacted to a tweet in terms of liking, replying, retweeting, sharing, blah 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 is an engagement, right? So I see that on an average I've got about 0.8% engagement, and this spiked over some 2-3 things. Let's essentially go back and figure out what were those tweets that helped me bring about engagements, and should I tweet more in the same category of tweets to improve my outreach and all that. So that those are the typical questions that you would want to answer using this one. Alright, social ROI. So now an interesting exercise for you to do is, and I think you should read up as well, is what is the ROI for a Facebook like? So this will be like a case study business question. If I'm interviewing somebody for a social media analytics role, if I ask them how do you measure the value of a like, Facebook like? So assuming I'm interviewing guys, right? So and I have a lot of positions open in my team as well, just to make it a little more lucrative. So wait, so guys, when you're going through the course, right? I always want you to keep an eye on the end goal, which is that you're actually trying to solve a problem at the end. These are all means to an end, which is all the tools that you're learning are programming. Don't get bogged down with that. Our programming is just a means to an end, and the end is to solve a business problem. So the business problem nature would be like this. Give me the question I have, which is posed to me by my CMO rather. I want to invest in social media channel. Do I invest or not? That's your whole question. I have to translate that to an analytics problem, and one part of that analytics problem is this: is it worthwhile to do something on Facebook which generates me 1 like? What is the sales value of that? We need to set specific performance window time to say, okay, I will give this 3 months and I will run a campaign which is a combination of a brand in the beginning and then becomes a sale campaign. I'll figure out how many people are liking the campaign, reacting to it, and I would also have to ensure that I can track this guy from where he's liked, in the sense that there should be a click through which is obviously tracked down to the sale page, right? Ensure that the sale page is tracked by using all web analytics and all that, and I can trace back his entire journey from a click to a conversion, and then I will essentially use that to extrapolate over my larger target population, saying if somebody likes X% would actually go ahead and buy. Think about the approaches when you get into whatever case study questions. So you don't have placements after this, do you? Or all right. So what are the costs? So okay, define ROI for me. How do you define ROI? Returns on investments. So essentially, it's an incremental revenue for whatever incremental cost that you spend out, right? So from a social media point of view, all these are very tangible costs, but there are a lot of intangibles as well. So in terms of whatever time you invest to do this, whatever designer inputs that you give, whatever license money and the paid campaign money as well. These are all tangible costs. There are a lot of intangibles to it as well. So which is why the social ROI is still a big hazy factor. We haven't really cracked that yet. Some of the tools that are existing today, right? I'll just pause and let you just read through it. It's a fairly straightforward tools. No, they're not. I think Buffer has a free one. Hootsuite probably has a free, like a limited free platform that you can probably use. Google Analytics is free. I mean, there is obviously a premium version which has a higher number of features, but Google is free. Radian 6 and blah 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 are all paid for. Polyanalyst is free, and this is an interesting tool that you should look at. Essentially helps you build your own dictionaries to do your text mining. So the whole concept of an NLP, it's a very simplistic version of NLP obviously, because this is just using our own dictionary. So this has GUI. Polyanalyst is a GUI. It's a GUI based tool, as opposed to what you plan to do, which is write a program to read directly from an API, put that into a tuple or a data set and read that off. That you can do anyways. That is that is outside of this. That is this part, which is using R or Python. You can pretty much do that. So all social media platforms do have a fairly good API and like the pretty big developer community around that API, which helps you solve all the problems and doubts and all that. So cool. All right, case studies. Okay, I'm just gonna skip some of these case studies. This is simpler case study because essentially about listening to understand what's happening out there across your platforms, and this is the most simplistic use cases of how we use social media, and the output is typically reports on a different frequency basis that are analyzed, and then people come back with insights to change your marketing communication, right? Skipping. Listening is what we just talked about. Skipping this. Different metrics by a platform. We've seen this before as well, so I'm going to skip this. Alright, okay, cool. So the reason why sentiment analysis is not, I don't prefer sentiment analysis. They have the tools itself come up with their own version of sentiment analysis. Like Crimson X or Radian 6, they have their own version of what sentiment, essentially negative or positive, and then they would throw out for all the text that they trawl from the internet, based on a set of keywords that you would decide. Let's say I want to understand. I'm introducing new product category in the wearables, which is a headband which helps measure my body fitness, right? Now that's a new product category, and I want to understand how this product category is doing in the overall fitness category, and I would essentially probably I will first come with a list of keywords for that category around fitness, right? Headband, fitness, and any other. So you have to think creatively out of the box to come up with an exhaustive list of keywords that will help the tool trawl the net and search for all the conversations with that keywords in it across the platform that you would select. And then you essentially that data comes back, which is unstructured, and the tool itself sorts through it and gives you aggregate reports, one of which is a sentiment analysis to say this is the X% of conversations are positive, Y% were neutral, Z is negative, right? Now that's very low in accuracy because you depend on the tool. It's under the hood. You don't know how the tools have implemented the same, which is why you use NLP. And I haven't done NLP, so I can't really speak about that. But I think a lot of packages in R and Python have built-in capabilities which you can just pretty much read off and apply for doing the sentiment analysis. I'm going to skip this, but this is just a manner of essentially saying that you can convert a pure prospect into a customer by engaging with them on the social media. This is from a engagement point of view, not from an analytics point of view. Like you essentially have to re-engage with them on a continuous basis till he becomes a customer, right? So use social media to do that. That's the whole seed nurturing concept. All right, network analysis. I talked about the whole influencer, the need to identify guys who can actually become brand ambassadors for us, right? So the way we do this, and I haven't done this personally, so I can't talk much about this, but these tools like PGP and NodeXL are actually open source tools out there, which helps you understand if there is a network of interconnected nodes, which is a node that's actually the most influential in that network, right? So you would essentially feed in your Twitter data, raw Twitter data, to figure out this is my central node and all my connected friends are there. Let's say I have about 50 odd followers, out of which two followers have 2 million followers. Now these two are the guys I need to focus on, because from a network point of view, they are interconnected to much more guys than I am. So if I focus on making sure they become my brand ambassadors, the potential outreach for my product is 2 million into 2 plus the rest 48, right? So that's how conceptually I would think about it. But these tools, these are Excel. This is actually an Excel plugin which helps you get to this visual interactivity of which is the node that is most useful. So these are open source, though you can try and experiment as well to figure out how your conversation spread and spillover effects and all that. Cool. All right. This is something I want to talk about in detail. Now, why does this become a social media case study? Because the data is essentially unstructured text data, which is reviews for Yelp.com. Yelp is very similar to Zomato.com, right? So essentially aggregates product reviews across restaurants in the US. I mean, it does it across different categories, but I think the case study that we're talking about is purely for the hotel industry, restaurant industry. So the business problem statement from a restaurant was that how do I improve my clientele, or how do I get improved ratings? So can I identify specific traits about a restaurant that will predict whether my restaurant business will be a success or not? Now here a lot of things are very open-ended. Success or not, we have to define what does success mean for a restaurant when it comes to data on Yelp.com, right? So first thing we do is obviously define your success. And the way the whole research community defined it was, if you get, I think you should try this on Zomato as well. Zomato, if they give you have your capstone project, right? So I think probably think about trying to implement that on Zomato.com's data, which is, I don't know if it's available. We probably have to connect to those guys. But the idea is, let's define the success criteria, right? To say that if you have 200 or more ratings, then it's definitely a popular restaurant. It's a success. These numbers obviously change by geography, and you would have to decide what's the geography that you want to start off with. You will say, okay, within HSR, for X restaurants, we'll have to define different forms of success criteria. This is by no means like a foolproof methodology, but it gives you a direction as to how do you use social data to define success for a restaurant. So yeah, so defining success, I think again in terms of star ratings, if it's greater than or equal to 4 and has at least 30 ratings, but if the star rating is greater than or equal to 3, needs to have higher number of reviews, right? Everything else is considered 0. Now this is a very loose definition, but you can obviously work on it. It changes from geography to geography. But with this in place, now this is my outcome variable or a binary variable that I want to model for. And in addition to that, the hypothesis is that there are different attributes like the kind of cuisine in terms of Mexican, fast food, Asian dishes, blah blah blah, that help you become successful in the long run. So what this problem translates to, it becomes a classification problem again, where this is probably one row of how that data set looks like, which is to say, this is my unique identifier of a business, this is the geography in terms of zip code, this is the total number of count of reviews, the total number of features in a restaurant, and all of this becomes a categorical variable in terms of just having 1 and 0 levels, right? 1, 0. And obviously your outcome variable is this, which is success. Now, having defined your overall business statement into this analytics problem data set, obviously you treat this as a classification problem, and you would apply all your typical classification models to solve that problem. And I think these guys applied CART the research community that looked at, they applied CART. CART is a very, I personally like CART a lot, or trees, because trees gives you a very intuitive set of explanation, right? You spoke about whether it should be intuitive or not. Now, in such a very open-ended problem statement, I think it helps that you're intuitive, because you can explain your outcome to a business, which is to say this. The outcome typically looks like this. So the cart gave me a set of features. So how does typically a tree look like? We'll give you essentially the tree and your n nodes, which helps you maximize your probability of conversion or whatever, of a success, right? So the best nodes pop out to be this. There's a combination of zip code and the fact that you have fast food, European dishes, Latin American, and the total number of features. So these are all the significant features that help you define success, and there is a intuitive explanation for all of that. So the outcome of the model is just this. This is how you would explain it to the business, saying, okay, it makes sense that, okay, if zip code is actually important because geographical location is important, you are actually located in a commercially viable area where you have larger number of walk-ins or footsteps, and hence you'll have higher success rates, right? Fast food has been driving a lot of business for you, because people are always in need of a quick snack or a meal. Let's just add fast food. So the business in turn would actually take decisions around, what do I change among my feature set to improve my ratings on Zomato, Yelp, right? So this is your analytics problem, this is your business explanation, and then you would do a follow-up with the other activities that you would do around that. Alright, I'm going to stop with this. This is the experiment that I talked about, which is conducted by a Brazilian company. Now this is fairly interesting. So so typically when you talk about running any social media campaign, right, you don't know what's the engagement levels that's going to pop out from your campaign. Now the Brazilian company here, I forget the name of the company, I'll go back and research, but they've claimed to have built a tool that can game the system, saying they can actually predict engagement. Now how did they do it is a very interesting activity. So I'll jump to the next one. So what they've done essentially, they're the design of experiment, right? So do you understand the concept of design of experiments? And see, creating an overall experiment step by step, right? They did it in 3 ways. So what they've done is they've said any campaign that you would run on Facebook or on social media can be broken down to 3 pillars, which is the format in which the ad campaign has to be, which is either text, image, or video. The content type. So they're saying every campaign has to have at least 3 or 4 different content types. Now they were doing the experiment for a fitness company, so their content type was around so going to the gym, the nutrition, and fitness equipments, right? So these 3 were their content pillars or content types. And then they had, I wrote about this because this is fairly close to my heart, which is why I wrote about these content types, and the channel in which you would actually go after putting out these ads on. Now this is essentially a 3 by 3 by 3, right? Now this actually takes on a little more complex dimensions, because if you look at it, you can add the time of the day and the day of the week as well, and as to when you would run these ads. So ultimately boils down to this: I run a video ad on Facebook about, say, nutrition or writing at 4 p.m. on a Friday, right? That's just one line, but you ultimately have whatever 27 into 24 into 7. Whoever is good at math, please do that. Types of combinations possible, and they run this ad. They run this experiment for close to 32 weeks. So they have a sizable number of sample sets by which you can actually try and game this. And how does this translate to? It becomes a problem like this, and they're essentially trying to predict engagement, which is, say, somebody clicked or did not click, which is 1 or 0. So it ultimately boils down, I'm simplifying this obviously, but ultimately boils down to assigning weightages to the all different feature sets. Now, and I would ultimately get a model that will help me predict engagement, and obviously you can do all of these to get to improving your modeling statement. So what they've done is they've productized the whole solution. They've come up with a full-fledged automated product into which you would feed in just the first 3 pillars. They would run this over a sizable number of time frame, then they would collect the data, they would mine through it, and they'll come back to you saying the best time for you to run this type of ad is whatever, some time frame where you get the highest number of engagements on Facebook as a platform based on your content type. That's what they've done. So that's how they've gamed the whole social media, prediction point of view. That's all I had.